Hey YouTube, welcome to my video. I'll be going over a few different things in this video, particularly how to craft mid-tier items, meaning items that are worth about a divine or more, and roughly under 50 divines at the kind of cap there. We'll be going through some sample workflows for crafts that are useful for different slots, and in a simple introduction into more advanced crafting. So mid-tier crafting. Where do I start? When should I use this currency? And how do I finish this item? So crafting overall can be broken down into 4 simple steps. Base preparation, the first side of the affixes, the second side of the affixes, and finishing an item. As a general rule, you want to finish one side of the affixes before you move on to the other side. That just makes it simpler to craft. And the reason for that is you get to use metacrafts, which are the ones that say suffixes cannot be changed and prefixes cannot be changed. Also, you can use things like algix and nulls, which let you change one side of the item without affecting the other side. So it's really good to finish one side before moving on to the other side. Now, there are exceptions to that rule, but that requires some Giga brain crafting, which is out of the scope of this video. So let's go into the first step of the craft. So the first step is base preparation. You want to buy whatever item it is as a normal base or a rare base. You can make it normal afterwards, but you want to buy the item that you want to craft on. Now, there are a few different things you want to look at before you buy it. One, and is probably the most important, is the eye level. You want to make sure that the mods that you want can actually roll on that item. So craftofexile.com, PoE.db, these are really good resources to check to make sure that whatever mod you want can roll on that item at that level. There's been so many times where I've wasted currency and just to check that I don't have the proper base for it. So that's really important. Next is fractured bases. Fractured bases guarantee you one mod on the craft. So consider how you'll start the craft when you're picking your mod. So if you're choosing an essence, choose a fracture mod that doesn't use that essence, for example, and other things like that. Also, if you're using defense fossils, maybe you can either double down on getting a defense fracture, or you can get one on the other side of the craft to make it easier to get something on there. Next is influences. So you want to think about what influences you want on the base. Do you need shaper influence? Do you want the eldritch influences? What kind of mods do you want on there? Typically, depending on the slot, there's things that are really good. So for example, on gloves, it's really easy to get leech on gloves, elemental leech. Whereas on boots, you can get things like onslaught, tailwind, and elusive. So those are really good mods as well. So depending on what kind of mods you want there, you want different types of influence. Next is quality. For weapons and really high defense gear bases, you want more than 20% quality, if possible. And then last is experimental bases. So Heist provides special bases for late game, and they also have some build enabling ones as well. So it's always good to check those bases to see if there's anything cool there. Can I do this? So this chart here shows what kind of influences, what kind of crafting tech you can kind of combine together. So we have Eldritch influence, Shaper, Conqueror, Elder influence, Fracture, Experimented bases, and Veiled. So you can see here the circles mean that they work well together, X's mean that they don't, and NA means that it wouldn't affect it. So you can just take a look at that afterwards, but generally this is how it works. It's a good reference if you need it. So moving on, the first side of the affixes. So when you start the craft, you want to see which side you should start on, the prefixes or the suffixes. How you choose that depends on how you want to craft. So on the first side of the affixes, you can craft with fossils, essences, harvest, and alteration orbs. Those are typically like the basic ones that you can use. So for essences, if you're using a fractured base, start with an essence that gives a mod on the other side. So for example, if you're using a fractured base with life, you want to use an essence that gives you a suffix. And by doing that, it'll reduce the difficulty of the craft a lot. Next is fossils. Use them if you're crafting something with a lot of tags. So lots of fire tags, cold tags, defense tags. And you can combine multiple fossils together to block other tags as well. The best resource for this is pathofexile.com. It'll calculate the best combination of fossils to... Later on in the video, I have a slide that shows how to use that. You can take a look at that. Then we have Harvest. Harvest Reforge X, so Reforge Fire, Cold, Lightning, will guarantee a mod of that item. It's really good for starting low and mid-tier crafts. Occasionally you can just spam it, get lucky, and have a good item. Last is Alteration Orbs. It's really good for crafting jewels and other items with 4 mods. So moving on to the second side of the affixes. Once you're done the first side and you have 3 mods, they're good, you can start crafting with Eldritch Currency, Veiled Orbs, Harvest, and Bestiary. So for Eldritch Chaos, this is really good because you can just craft on the other side without having to use metacrafts, which are expensive. That being said, Eldritch Chaos can be expensive as well, and you can only use it with Eldritch type influence items. So you can't use it on Shaper, Conqueror, and Elder influence items. Then we have Veil Orbs. So there's 2 different types of Veil Orbs, the Veiled Chaos and Veiled Exalt. These basically give you a upgraded version of crafted mods. So the timing is slightly different on when you want to use them, but a very simple breakdown would be the Chaos Orb would be the 4th mod that you want to add, and then the Exalted one is the 5th mod that you want to add. And then Harvest acts quite similarly. Reforges should be used to add your 4th mod, and Add Then Remove should be used for your 5th mod. Note that both Reforge and Veiled Chaos has a chance to fill up the item. So if you're not crafting using an Eldritch item, you have to annul it and possibly brick it. Now in Curse of Allflame, there is a craft with Ducals that let you annul safely, or at least somewhat safely. They'll give you 4 options on what you will annul, so that is another option for you to use. That being said, it can break your item still. Lastly is Bestiary. It has various crafts, mostly used for things like Wild Bristle Matron, but it also has things like Exalt Slams, Influent Exalt Slams, so it can be helpful depending on what you want to do. And then we have finishing the item. So when you're finishing the item, you want to do things like adding Eldritch Embers and Ichors. You can aim for perfect implicits using Conflict Orbs and going back and forth on those. Next is using Exalts, so Influence or Normal Exalts. When crafting a mid-tier item, you typically want to get 4 mods, and then use the crafting bench for the 5th mod, and then just Exalt Slam the last one. For that Exalt Slam, you can either use Influence or a normal Exalt, depending on what you're aiming for. Typically, I just use normal ones because I like having the Eldritch implicits. Then you want to make sure to divine and bless your items just to get the best roll ranges. Typically for a mid-tier craft though, you wouldn't use divines. It's just not worth it. For higher investments ones, yeah, it's worth it. Or if you're aiming for a particular mod to be better. So maybe you want to have a really high ES chest. Maybe a few divines would be good for it. Maybe not. Depends on you. Lastly is quality currency and sockets and links. If you haven't already, add that. Next, I'm going to be going over some sample workflows. These are pretty detailed crafts, but the work process and the workflow can be used for other crafts. You would just need to change out the essences or change out the mods that you're aiming for. But the way and the steps to get there are very, very similar for a lot of crafts. So the first craft we're going over are mid-tier boots. These are very useful for up until early red maps, maybe even further. But what we want on these boots are T1 life, veiled movement speed, some chaos resistances, and 2 other elemental resistances. Now the first thing you want to do is prepare a life fracture base. So you can either buy it or create it depending on how the prices are. Probably it's cheaper to just buy one. Now if armor, evasion, ES matter to your build, consider getting a better base because it does help a little bit there. Next is resistance essence spamming. So depending on the resistance that you want or whatever is cheapest in the market at the time, use anger, hatred, or wrath essences until you have another high tier res mod. If you get 3 suffixes, you'll need to annul one, or just continue rolling until you have an empty one. Next is to lock and reforge. So what locking means is to lock the suffixes or lock prefixes. In this case, we're using the benchcraft suffixes cannot be changed, which is locking suffixes. Then you can use the harvest bench to reforge fire, cold, lightning, or chaos resistances and get you the last resistance and fill out your suffixes. Now, a cheaper alternative is to just keep on essence spamming until you get 1 or 2 resistances that you want, and just exalt slam for the last one. Because suffix cannot be changed is 2 divines, and it might just not be worth it whenever you're doing this craft. Next step is lock and veiled orb. So lock suffixes, or because all of your suffixes are full, you can use the wild bristle matron in the bestiary, and that will give you suffixes cannot be changed. Then you use the veiled chaos orb, and that will give you one of the squiggly veiled mods. Before you unveil it, craft mana, and when you craft mana, mana cannot roll when you're trying to unveil the mod. So you want to do that so the pool is just less. Once that's crafted, right click it and then hope that move speed is one of the mods that pop up. After that, you can just craft a different mod, add quality, other eldritch implicits, socket, and link. If you want, you can do one last exalt slam for the last mod. And finally, if you didn't get move speed when you unveiled, you have 2 options. One is you can go back to the previous step and just redo it. 2 is just craft move speed and just move on. Moving on to the next craft. The next one we have is a mid-tier ES body armor. So remember, these crafts can be used for armor bases and evasion bases as well, or hybrid. Just get those types of bases and you'll be good. So starting off, we want T2 energy shield percentage, hybrid ES, flat ES, resistance mods, and then 1 crafted mod. So the first thing you want to do is prepare an ES fracture. Here I have a percent fracture. You can also use a hybrid fracture if you want, but it's generally better for a percent fracture. And for body armor crafts that have to do with the defenses mods, you do want to get the best base item as possible. So here I'm using a Twilight Regalia. If you're using an evasion base, you should be getting a Syndicate Garb, for example. So T2 ES percentage also requires eye level 84. If you're aiming for T1, you should be getting, I believe it's 86. If possible, try to get one with quality that is above 20. And if you need it, get one with a 6 link. And then once you have your ES, and then once you have your base, you can use woe essences until you get hybrid ES. Then now you have 3 prefix modifiers. You can start using Eldritch Currency, so Eldritch Chaos, Annuls, and Normal Exalts to get good suffixes. So you can just keep rolling them, and I would settle personally on just 2 elemental resistance mods that have like 30%, and then craft something else on the open suffix. After that, you can just finish the item like normal, Eldritch implicits, quality, and sockets links. Next, we have a craft that is on the higher side of mid-tier. These are mid-tier cold conversion gloves. The reason why this is on the higher side is it just takes a lot of RNG to get the specific mod, as well as it's using a fractured temple cold resistance mod. So that cold resistance mod gives you increased damage to chilled enemies, and you would need a fractured version of it to start the craft. That being said, let's start it. We are aiming for crafted life, a veiled version of fizz to cold conversion, temple cold resistances, T2 suppression, and attack speed. So the first thing you want to do is prepare a fractured base. If you want to get T1 suppression, you should be aiming for eye level 85. If not, you can get one lower. Then you want to use Zeal essences. This gives you attack speed until you get T2 spell suppression. And then from here, this is very heavily RNG. You want to lock suffixes or use Wild Bristle Matron, Veiled Chaos, block mana, and then unveil fizz to cold. This is about a 1 in 11 chance to get the mod. If Mirage currency stays in the game and you can use the Harvest Craft change attack mods to a different element, this becomes a little bit easier. Alternatively, I think there is a craft in Curse of the Allflame that lets you do the same thing. So you can use that too, and it becomes a 3 in 11 chance. So it's a little bit better. If you end up filling the prefixes, use an Eldritch Annul to safely remove a prefix. Once you have the Veiled Fizz to Cold conversion, you can craft life. And if there's still an open prefix, you can just Exalt Slam. Afterwards, add quality, Eldritch implicits, socket, and link. Next, we have jewel crafting. There's 3 methods that I personally use. The first one is alts, second is fossils, third is harvest reforge. So the first one, alt, augmentation, regal, exalt. This is the ultimate pain craft, but it is probably the cheapest method. Basically, you just alt spam until you get something good. You throw an augment if there's an open prefix or suffix. You regal it, and then you exalt it, and you just pray for each step to give you something good. It's pretty bad, but it is the cheapest way to craft in most cases, and eventually you do get something. The way that you do this is you always want to start with a fractured mod, alt, aug, and then optionally, once you have 2 good affixes, you can imprint the item if they're really, really good. You'd want to do that on maybe cluster jewels if you get something really good, but typically it's probably not worth it. And then, like I said, regal and pray, exalt and pray, and then I would personally settle on a jewel that has 3 good mods. Then we have fossil crafting. So fossil crafting is not so much doing the craft itself, but more so planning it out. So first, you want to figure out what mods you want and which ones have tags and which ones don't. From there, you should get a fractured mod with the one with either the lowest weight or one without a tag. So for example, if I want to craft a Righteous Fire Jewel, I want life, fire damage over time, and damage over time. So since I want something that has 2 fire tags, a life tag, and one that can't be targeted, I would personally start off with a fractured mod with damage over time, and then use either scorched fossils or pristine and scorched fossils to try to target them together. Now you can also use 3 or 4 socket resonators, but they are more expensive, but it does give you a better chance of rolling what you want. On the next slide, I do have a general guide on how to use the Path of Exile fossil calculator, just to help you figure out what's the best. Next, we have Harvest. Harvest is kind of a brainless way to craft as well, but it's very reliable for jewels. Similar to fossils, you start off with one fractured mod that doesn't have tags, and then you just keep reforging for whatever has tags. So same thing for the Righteous Fire Jewel. I would get one with damage over time fracture and either use life reforge or fire reforge and just keep doing it, and maybe exalt and annul if needed, and then settle on a 3/3 mod jewel. So on the fossil calculator, this is a very basic guide on how to use it, but on Path of Exile, you want to get to the jewel section or whatever section you want to craft, and then select the mods that you want, and then click on Compute Best Selection. That will spit out all of the different fossil types that you can use for that particular craft. On the left side, it says Raw Efficiency. This is if you don't care about cost, you can just use those ones and that will take that many tries. And if you want cost efficiency, if you're playing a particular league and you're not solo self-found, cost efficiency would be better because it's dictated by the market prices. Now, if you are using a fractured mod, you want to make sure that the fractured box at the top beside fossils is checked, and then you want to right click on the mod that you have fractured when you're selecting it, and that'll block it properly. Advanced methods. How do I make Giga items? Where are more resources? So I typically stick to crafting mid-tier items. Every once in a while, I'll create something somewhat high tier. So I'm not the best person for guidance on this, but I will show one workflow of a double elevated craft. And then I'll give you some other resources in the slide afterwards, just to show you where you can go for better workflows, more resources, and things like that. So for the sample craft here, we're going to be working on a dual influence explode endurance charge body. So the desired mods that we want are Crusader Explode, Warlord Endurance Charges, a bunch of Energy Shield, and any crafted mod. So it's somewhat mid-tier, somewhat high-tier in that area there. The first thing you want to do is prepare a base. So buy a Vol Regalia at eye level 85. You want an Alchemy Orbit to make it rare, and then use a Crusader Orb on it to add the influence. Alternatively, you can just buy a Crusader Twilight Regalia if you don't want to do that. Just depends on the pricing. Then you want to scour it and then use alterations and Augs until you get T1 Explode. From here, if you want, optionally you can add memory strands, and instead of alteration spams, you can use fossils for explode. This makes getting the ES easier, but it does take more money in the beginning stages. Once you have T1 explode, you use an imprint in the bestiary, and they'll give you a saved version of the item. Then in the next step, you want to make sure that there's no suffixes on the magic item. So you want to annul the suffix. If you hit the prefix, revert back to the imprint that you had and make a new one before you continue again. But you want to continue doing that until you remove the suffix. Once you remove it, craft prefixes cannot be changed on the crafting benches. Then imprint it one more time and then make sure that you destroy the old imprint so you don't accidentally use it. Regal, and if you have an influence mod, just move straight to step 3. If you don't, reforge influence. Now you want to elevate the explode mod in this next step. So to do that, you want to annul until you only have 2 Crusader mods and only Crusader prefixes. In other words, you want to have explode as your only prefix or explode and another Crusader prefix. You don't want any other prefixes on that item. So annul until you have that. If you annul explode, revert back to the imprint in step 2. Once you have the item like that, you want to use the Orb of Dominance so that the explode is elevated. If you elevate the other Crusader mod, go back to step 2. So you have to do that a few times probably, unless you get lucky. Next is you want to prepare multiple donors. So the main item is the Vol Regalia with the explode, and then all the other ones are going to be donors. So the donor is going to have endurance charges, and this can be any armor base. It doesn't have to be a Vol Regalia. It can be anything that you want, and any item level. Just make sure that it can roll if you're trying to roll it yourself. But if you're buying it, it can be anything. So you want to get one that has only endurance charges as its influence mod. And if you want, you can get one that is elevated. Next, you want to prepare multiple donor bases so that you have a better chance of hitting good ES in the final step. When you're using an Awakener Orb with a Hinekora lock, every donor base is considered different if it has a different number of influence mods on it. If they all have only one influence mod on it, they'll be considered the same. So you won't be able to check different ones. Now, if, like I said, if they have a different number of them, you will be able to check all of those to see the end result. But as you have more influence mods on the item, the less chance there will be for the desired mod to be transferred to the awakened item. Moving on, once you've prepared all your bases, you can go to the bestiary and apply the craft Hinekora lock on a magic item. This is known by the community as beast locking. So you want to use that craft on the base with the explode on it. After that, use an Awakener Orb on the donor, and then hover over the explode base. Don't click on it. Just see what happens to the item. And only click on it if two things happen. One is the endurance charge is moved over, and it has good ES mods. So if you're just doing the one with only endurance charges, that is guaranteed to move over. But if you're using multiple influence ones, you will need to double check that the endurance mod is moved over as well. In the case that none of your bases are good, cancel the Awakener Orb, and then use either fusings or chromo orbs on it. So you reset the beast lock, and then you just want to repeat that until you have something good on it. Lastly, here are some resources that you can use for further crafting. So crafting with like triple or quad elevated items, or some sort of super armor stacker items using breach mods and transferring them over, things like that. These are the resources that you should be looking at. So SebK and Spicy Sushi, they're both streamers and YouTubers. They have very good multi-mirror crafts as well as really cool crafts in general. They use things with like memory strands, doing quad elevated items. It's very ridiculous. It's generally quite interesting to watch and see the process of these big items and use parts of it in mid-tier or higher tier crafting. Next is recombinators. Recombinators can build some really cool items and very high tier items for very cheap, but it's super RNG based and it is kind of a pain to use. If you want to use it, you can refer to the Wikipedia here. And finally, we have Reddit. So there's two major PoE subreddits. One is PoE Path of Exile, and the other one is Path of Exile builds. Both of them have the rule where if you post an item showcase, you have to provide the steps on how you created it. So it's always good to go through there and see how people made their Giga items, and it is a good kind of reference point. So do recommend looking through that. But that is the video. Crafting items can be rewarding and profitable. I generally play on trade, but I play as kind of a semi solo self found. I craft all of my gear, and I only buy uniques and crafting materials. But yeah, I craft everything myself, and it is quite fun because it kind of gives a challenge to the game, as well as it's quite rewarding to see the final phase of your character, and you can say that you built that all from scratch. And yeah, it's just fun to have like a really cool item that you made. Whether it's good or not is questionable, but yeah, it's just a really cool part of the game to explore. So I definitely recommend you to take a look, check it out. And yeah, please subscribe if you liked the video. Cheers, guys. Thanks for watching.